The threshold of Maple Ridge Farm was a portal. For Julian Vance, a man whose existence was framed by the cold geometry of skyscrapers and the relentless hum of global markets, stepping inside was like entering another era. It wasn't the scent of aged wood and baked apples, nor the comfortable sag of the antique sofa that stopped him. It was a painting. Hung with unassuming pride, it depicted a sun-drenched meadow, a scene Eliza had meticulously captured on canvas 2 decades prior, in the vibrant, hopeful days before she had simply vanished. Julian Vance was not a man easily moved. Life, in its relentless assault and subsequent rewards, had seen to that. Earlier, as his chauffeured car had sliced through the winding roads of Vermont, his gaze had skimmed the undulating, flame-kissed autumn hills with an indifference that had become a well-worn shield. This trip was, on its surface, pragmatic. Another assessment of pastoral properties, quaint inns, perhaps an orchard, to diversify an already colossal portfolio. But his heart, that hollow chamber, wasn't in it. It hadn't truly been in anything for 20 years. The late afternoon sun bled long, sorrowful shadows across the landscape, and the crisp air, though bracing, offered only a fleeting illusion of comfort. An old, familiar ache pulsed in his chest, a chasm that no acquisition, no victory could bridge. Liza. Memories of her, of their incandescent life in New York City, were specters that never slept. 20 years. The wound was still an open sore. As his driver had approached the next listed property, an imposing old inn, Julian had gestured dismissively. "I'll walk for a bit," he'd murmured, the words more an internal decree than a command. The driver, accustomed to such moods, had simply nodded. What siren song drew him down this leaf-carpeted dirt path, away from the structured certainty of his business dealings? Perhaps it was the echoing emptiness within, the perpetual gnawing hunger for something authentic, something untainted by transaction. The rhythmic crunch of his expensive leather shoes on fallen leaves was the only sound to break the profound stillness. For a fragile moment, he allowed himself to be lost in it. Then, nestled amongst rows of gnarled apple trees, he saw it, Maple Ridge Farm. A small, unpretentious farmhouse, a relic of simpler times, utterly alien to his world of polished chrome and curated views. Yet it possessed an undeniable, almost magnetic pull. Without conscious volition, his feet carried him forward. In the front yard, a young woman, barely out of her teens, was immersed in a late-season garden. She moved with a calm, rhythmic grace, harvesting squash, her auburn hair, escaping its loose tie, catching the golden light of the declining sun. Oblivious to his approach, she was a portrait of focused serenity. When she finally looked up, her smile was disarmingly warm, as if greeting an old friend. "Afternoon," she called, her voice clear, wiping soil-stained hands on her denim overalls. "Can I help you with something?" Julian, a man used to layers of deference and unspoken expectation, was momentarily thrown by her casual openness. Here, in the heart of the Vermont countryside, this young woman addressed him without artifice. "I was just passing by," he managed, his voice, usually a tool of command, sounding unexpectedly gruff. "Thought I'd take a look around." "Well, you're welcome to," she replied, her New England accent carrying a gentle lilt. "I'm Sophie, by the way. This here's our family farm. Not much, but we make do." Sophie. The name was innocuous, but an inexplicable current, a strange resonance with this girl, unsettled him. His gaze swept the property. Its simple, unvarnished beauty, its lived-in charm, a stark counterpoint to the sterile perfection he usually inhabited. "Would you like some cider?" Sophie offered, her question breaking into his reverie. "My mama makes the best pressed cider you'll ever taste, I swear." Habit nearly made him decline. Casual invitations, lingering in unfamiliar homes. These were not his customs. Yet something about this place, this girl, compelled an uncharacteristic, "Sure, I could use a cup." Sophie's smile widened, and she gestured him inside. The farmhouse was small, undeniably cozy, filled with antique furniture that whispered of generations past. The comforting aroma of warm cider and cinnamon hung in the air. Despite himself, Julian felt a knot of tension within him begin to loosen. Then, as they stepped into the living room, his gaze fell upon it, and the world tilted on its axis. His heart seized. The painting. A simple, luminous depiction of a meadow bathed in the soft, ethereal light of a setting sun, wildflowers dotting the foreground. Not just any meadow. Central Park. The very scene Eliza had painted for him a lifetime ago, when their future in New York City had seemed an endless, sunlit vista. He stared, his breath catching, the room blurring at the edges. Oh! This image, rendered with Eliza's unique touch, was a sacred relic of a life he'd believed irrevocably lost. Who painted this? The question was a choked whisper, heavy with disbelief. Sophie's glance towards the painting was casual, affectionate. Oh, that. My mom did. She's real talented with a brush, though she doesn't do it as much anymore. Too busy running the farm and all. She's in Burlington right now, picking up supplies. Should be back by tomorrow, though. Julian's mind fractured. His pulse hammered against his ribs. Could it be? After 2 decades of ghosts and regrets, could Eliza be here? Alive? He couldn't tear his gaze from the canvas, his thoughts a chaotic scramble. The scene was too potent, too achingly specific. He had stood in that exact spot with Eliza, watching her translate the golden hour onto her canvas, the very light now immortalized here. But this Vermont farmhouse. It was a world away from their past. He swallowed, a painful constriction in his throat, battling a tidal wave of resurgent emotion. Memories, long and brutally suppressed, clawed their way to the surface. He turned back to Sophie, his voice a strained rasp. Your mother. What's her name? Eliza, Sophie answered with an easy shrug. Eliza Morgan. The floor seemed to drop away. Eliza Morgan. Was it conceivable? The same Eliza Hayes who had been the vibrant center of his universe, who had vanished from their New York life as if into thin air. His hands clenched, not in anger, but against the sheer, overwhelming force of the moment. He yearned to believe, yet a lifetime of cynicism gnawed. He couldn't blurt it out, not yet. He needed more. How long have you lived here? He asked, struggling to maintain an even tone while his mind reeled. Pretty much my whole life, Sophie said, a small laugh escaping her. My mama moved out here when I was just a baby. She's always liked the quiet, the wide-open spaces. Said it was the perfect place to raise a kid. Julian nodded, his focus fragmenting. The Eliza he'd known had thrived on the electric energy of the city. But then she had disappeared, leaving behind every trace of her former self. If trauma, if amnesia. Perhaps a quiet, rural existence was a sanctuary built on forgotten pain. She never talks about where she's from, though, Sophie added, a slight frown creasing her brow. I've asked a couple of times, but she always just says it's in the past, Sophie, it doesn't matter anymore. So I stopped asking. A fresh pang of anguish struck Julian. What had Eliza endured? What horrors had followed her disappearance? His initial, frantic search had eventually given way to a bleak acceptance of her loss, perhaps her death. He'd attempted to move on, but the void she'd left was a constant, dull ache. And now this, her daughter, staring at a painted ghost of their shared past. Is your mom still in Burlington? He asked, his voice gaining a sliver of composure, though the anticipation was a live current within him. Yeah, she'll be back tomorrow morning, I think, Sophie replied, her smile open and friendly. You're welcome to come by then. She'll be real surprised to meet someone new. We don't get many visitors out this way. A tight, forced smile stretched Julian's lips. I might just do that. Their conversation continued for a few more minutes, but Julian was adrift, his thoughts a maelstrom. The painting. Eliza. If it truly was her, what would recognition, or its absence, bring? Had the intervening years, the unknown trauma, completely erased him from her memory. After finishing the cider, Julian offered his thanks and stepped back out into the crisp Vermont air. It did nothing to dispel the fog in his mind. He walked back to the waiting car, climbing in as if in a trance. "Back to the hotel, sir?" the driver inquired. Julian nodded, his gaze lost on the passing landscape. One thought consumed him: tomorrow. Potential reunion. The possibility of answers that had eluded him for 2 decades. Yet a cold dread coiled in his gut. What if she didn't remember? What if her new life, her new family, had no place for a ghost from a forgotten past? The journey back to his Burlington hotel was a muted blur. In his room, Julian sank into an armchair, staring out at the distant moon-silvered peaks of the Green Mountains. Memories assailed him, vivid and poignant. Eliza's laughter at a Soho gallery, the comforting weight of her hand in his during their endless walks through Central Park, the devastating emptiness of the day she disappeared. His world had fractured then, and never truly mended. Success, empire, wealth. All hollow substitutes for the peace she had represented. As the city lights shimmered below, a silent vow formed within him. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would unearth the truth. He had to know if Eliza Morgan was the Eliza Hayes he had mourned. And if she was, he would move heaven and earth to make things right. Sleep was a cruel tease that night. Julian wrestled with the bedclothes, his mind a relentless projector of what-ifs. Eliza's face as he remembered it, vibrant, luminous with love, superimposed itself over the faded image in the old photograph he'd carried like a talisman for 20 years. The photograph he intended to show her. By the time Dawn's pale fingers crept through the hotel curtains, his resolve had solidified. Today he would confront the truth, in whatever guise it appeared. Answers. He had waited an eternity. He dressed with fumbling haste, his hands betraying a tremor as he fastened his shirt. Breakfast was an impossibility. Anxiety had stolen his appetite. The pull towards Maple Ridge Farm, towards Eliza, was irresistible. As the car crunched to a halt before the unassuming farmhouse, Julian's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The house, outwardly unchanged, small, peaceful, a haven of rustic simplicity, now seemed charged with an almost unbearable significance. Sophie was in her garden as before. She looked up, her smile instantaneous and bright. "Morning, Mr. Vance," she called. "You're back early. I take it you're here to meet my mom." Julian could only nod, his throat constricted. Words felt like an insurmountable obstacle. Sophie wiped her hands on her overalls, her easy warmth a beacon in his turmoil. "She's inside," she said. "Come on in, I'll grab her for you." He followed, each footfall on the worn floorboards amplifying the frantic tempo of his heart. The ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to mark the seconds towards an unknown fate. He found himself in the small living room, his gaze locked on the painting, the silent instigator of this emotional storm. He was so absorbed, he didn't hear her enter. "Sophie says we have a guest." A soft voice from just behind him. Julian froze. Time stopped. Slowly, agonizingly he turned. Eliza Morgan. And yet, undeniably Eliza Hayes. Different, yes. Silver threaded the auburn hair he remembered, pulled back now in a loose, practical style. Lines etched by time, by experiences unknown to him, framed her eyes and mouth. But it was her. The essence of her. Eliza. Her expression was one of polite curiosity, the kind one offers a stranger. And he was, in a way. When last they'd met, they were young, their love a vibrant, living thing, their future a shared dream. Now they were older, separated by a chasm of lost years and unspoken sorrows. An eternity seemed to pass in silence. Julian's chest ached as he scanned her face, desperate for a flicker, a hint of recognition. Nothing. Her eyes, though warm, held a distant quality, as if looking through him rather than at him. "Julian," he managed, his voice a raw, unfamiliar sound. "My name is Julian Vance." Polite smile. Nod. "It's nice to meet you, Julian." The simple, courteous words were a physical blow. No memory. How? Desperation, sharp and visceral, clawed at him. He fumbled in his jacket, his hands shaking as he produced the photograph. Old, creased, faded, yet clear enough. The two of them, young, radiant, in love, against the backdrop of their New York City life. "Do you remember this?" he asked, his voice low, imbued with a desperate plea. Eliza took the photograph, her brow furrowing. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the image. For one heart-stopping moment, Julian thought he saw it. A flicker, a subtle shift in her expression. But then, a slow shake of her head, her face clouding with genuine confusion. I don't know," she said softly. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember." His world crumbled. Bracing for it was one thing. Hearing the words, seeing the blankness in her eyes, was another. The woman he'd loved, searched for, mourned, a stranger. "I used to know you, Eliza," Julian said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "We were going to be married. You painted that picture on the wall right there. You used to live in the city. Your name wasn't always Morgan. It was Eliza Hayes." At Hayes, her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She took a hesitant step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Hayes," she whispered, the sound barely audible. I don't know." Her confusion was palpable, heartbreakingly real. She wasn't feigning. Something had violently excised him, their life, from her memory. "Please," he implored, moving a step closer. "Just think. Try to remember. We loved each other. We were going to start a life together. But you disappeared. I never stopped looking for you." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes as she shook her head again. "I don't know," she whispered, lost. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophie, a silent, anxious witness from the doorway, stepped forward. "Mom, are you okay?" Eliza nodded quickly, brushing at her eyes. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice trembled. I need a minute." She turned and fled the room, leaving Julian adrift in a sea of renewed desolation. Julian stood, rooted to the spot, Eliza's abrupt departure echoing the void she'd left 20 years ago. His heart, a leaden weight, throbbed with a confusing mix of nascent hope and profound despair. She didn't remember, not consciously, but some flicker, some disturbance, had rippled across the surface of her lost memories. He had seen it. Sophie moved into the room, her young face etched with a concern that mirrored his own turmoil. "I've never seen her like that before," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "She's always been so calm, so steady." Words failed Julian. The enormity of the situation, the collision of past and present, was overwhelming. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he finally managed, his voice raspy. "I didn't know. I had no idea this would." "You really knew her before all this?" A tight nod from Julian. "We were in love. We were planning to get married. Then she vanished. I never knew what happened. Until perhaps now." Sophie's expression softened with an empathy that belied her years. "I had no idea. She never spoke of her past, not before I was born anyway. I always just assumed she'd lived here in Vermont her whole life. But now..." Her gaze drifted towards the hallway, a new uncertainty clouding her usually bright eyes. The soft fall of footsteps announced Eliza's return. She was pale, her eyes still wide with a bewildered pain, yet a fragile resolve seemed to have taken root. Her initial gaze sought Sophie, a silent plea for grounding. "Mom," Sophie said gently, moving towards her. Eliza nodded slowly, her voice a shaky whisper. "I don't know. I feel like something's terribly wrong, something vital is missing." Her gaze finally met Julian's, and in their depths, he saw the chaotic struggle of a mind grappling with unwelcome, fragmented truths. "Eliza," Julian began, his voice imbued with a quiet urgency, I know this is deeply confusing, terrifying even. But what I'm telling you is the truth. We shared a life, a profound love in New York. And then you were gone. For 20 years I've searched for you. She closed her eyes, a fleeting shield against the onslaught. When they reopened, a faint light, a dawning glimmer of something, flickered within. I remember a feeling of being scared, she said, her voice barely audible. But it's all so fragmented. Like trying to assemble a shattered mirror. A surge of adrenaline, of fierce hope, shot through Julian. You were taken from me, Eliza, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Something catastrophic happened and you vanished. But my search for you never ended. Eliza hugged herself tightly, a defensive posture against the invading memories. I don't recall that, she whispered, shaking her head. I remember a field, yes. Sunlight. And I was painting. But everything beyond that is a void. Julian's breath hitched. The field. The painting. That's where it began, he urged softly. You were painting in a field, the very scene in that picture. He gestured to the artwork on the wall, and Eliza's eyes followed, lingering on the familiar, yet strangely alien image. I painted that, she asked, a note of dazed disbelief in her voice. You did, Julian affirmed, stepping infinitesimally closer. Just before everything changed. Just before you were ripped away from me. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth again, her fingers trembling. I don't know what to believe. It feels so real what you're saying, yet it's like watching a film about someone else's life, a life I don't recognize. The raw vulnerability in her voice pierced Julian. It is your life, Eliza, he said. His tone a careful balance of compassion and conviction. I understand how bewildering this is. But I swear every word is true. You were taken. Some trauma erased your past. But together we can uncover it. We can face it. Tears, bright and unbidden, welled in Eliza's eyes. I can't, she choked out, her composure shattering. I can't do this right now. She turned, her desperate gaze finding Sophie. I need some air. Sophie was instantly by her side, a comforting arm around her mother's shaking shoulders. It's okay, Mom, she soothed. Let's go outside. Take a deep breath. Julian watched, a helpless ache in his chest, as Sophie guided Eliza out through the front door. The sharp clap of the screen door shutting echoed in the sudden silence. He had dared to hope that his presence, his words, would unlock the floodgates of her memory. The reality, as always, was far more complex, far more painful. He moved to the window, his gaze following Eliza as she stood on the porch, her silhouette framed against the vast Vermont hills, a solitary figure wrestling with a stolen past. For the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Julian Vance had no idea what to do next. He stood by the window, a sentinel to Eliza's turmoil. His own thoughts a chaotic tempest. Eliza, just a few feet away, was adrift in a sea of fragmented memories. Every fiber of his being urged him to go to her, to somehow mend the broken pieces. But a deeper instinct warned him. This was a delicate, precarious process. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a jarring intrusion. Meredith. The timing was almost diabolical. It had been months, a carefully maintained distance. He knew her calls were rarely benign. His relationship with his sister had long ago devolved into a cold, transactional truce, the warmth of their shared childhood buried under layers of her ambition and his resentment. He'd never forgiven her relentless, subtle sabotage. Now, a far more sinister suspicion began to crystallize. With a deep, steadying breath, he answered. Meredith. Julian, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. Meredith's voice, sharp and imperious, cut through the line. What on earth are you doing in Vermont? My sources say you're sniffing around some rural properties. Julian closed his eyes, a familiar wave of irritation washing over him. It's business, Meredith. Nothing that need concern you. "Oh, you've always been so wonderfully transparent, haven't you?" she retorted, her sarcasm biting. A beat of silence then. "But is it just business, Julian? Or is there something else? I heard you've been making some rather personal visits." His pulse leaped. Her tone was laden, a veiled insinuation that set his nerves on edge. "What are you implying, Meredith?" "Implying? Moi." Her laugh was brittle, false. "You're the master of secrets, Julian. One might almost think you have something to hide. Or perhaps, just perhaps, you're the one stirring up trouble where it's long been buried." He clenched his jaw, the anger a slow burn. Meredith couldn't possibly know about Eliza. And yet, as he replayed their fraught history, her persistent jealousy, her uncanny ability to undermine his happiness, especially his relationship with Eliza, the pieces began to coalesce into a horrifying picture. He had always dismissed her actions as petty, sibling rivalry. Now, staring at the farmhouse that held Eliza, a chilling certainty dawned. "Meredith," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, the anger now a palpable force. "What did you do?" A fractional pause on the other end. The almost inaudible catch of her breath. "I haven't the faintest idea what you mean," she replied, her voice tight, strained. But he heard the lie. "I'm done with your games," he stated, his voice hardening as he turned from the window, the farmhouse a silent accusation behind him. "I found Eliza. Do you understand me, Meredith? I found her." Another silence, longer this time, stretched taut across the line. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Eliza Hayes. The woman I loved, the woman I was going to marry, before she was stolen from my life 20 years ago. The woman you despised. The woman, I'm rapidly beginning to realize, whose disappearance you orchestrated." For the first time in their conversation, Meredith's steely composure wavered. He could hear the sharp, ragged intake of her breath. "You're delusional," she snapped, but the denial lacked conviction. "I'm seeing things more clearly than ever," Julian countered. "And I will uncover every last detail. So, I suggest you start talking, Meredith. Before I tear apart everything to find the truth." The ensuing silence was thick with unspoken admissions. Then Meredith's voice, stripped of its usual artifice, emerged cold and calculating. "You were always a fool for her, Julian. Line. She was a liability." Julian's chest constricted. "What did you do to her, Meredith?" "She was going to destroy everything." Meredith's voice rose, laced with a sudden, venomous fury. "She was pulling you away from the family, from your obligations, from the empire we were building. You were obsessed, blind to how she was undermining your future." His mind reeled. "So you made her disappear." "I didn't make her disappear," Meredith corrected, her tone chillingly precise. "But shall we say, I facilitated circumstances that would ensure she was no longer a factor." Nausea roiled in Julian's stomach. "What in God's name does that mean?" "It means she's gone, Julian. Close chapter. 20 years. You moved on, you built your kingdom. Why unearth this now?" He gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "Because the past, Meredith, is standing right in front of me. She's alive. Eliza is alive." Meredith's sharp, involuntary gasp was all the confirmation he needed. She hadn't known. Her carefully laid plans had, in some crucial way, miscarried. "You're lying," she hissed, a desperate edge to her voice. "No lies," Julian said, his own voice deadly calm. "I'm in the same house where, moments ago, she told me she has no memory of me. Thanks, it seems, to whatever monstrous game you played." The silence that followed was absolute, a void of Meredith's dawning terror. "I will find out everything, Meredith," Julian continued, his voice a low promise of retribution. "And when I do, you will answer for every last bit of it." Before she could utter another word, he ended the call. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with a righteous, consuming rage. The truth, hideous as it was finally within his grasp. "Meredith, his own sister. But his immediate, overwhelming concern was Eliza. He had to help her reclaim her memories, and he had to shield her from any further fallout from Meredith's depravity. The acrid residue of his conversation with Meredith clung to Julian, yet amidst the fury, a stark clarity emerged. The 20-year mystery of Eliza's disappearance was no longer a shapeless specter. It had a name, a face: his own sister. The betrayal was a fresh, gaping wound. But Eliza, her memory shattered, her past stolen, deserved the unvarnished truth, however painful. He had to tell her. He found them on the porch, Eliza and Sophie, their hushed voices a fragile counterpoint to the storm raging within him. Eliza's gaze was distant, lost somewhere in the rolling green expanse of the Vermont hills. Julian stepped onto the creaking porch boards. "Eliza," he began, his voice gentle despite the turmoil, "I need to talk to you. About everything." Sophie's concerned eyes darted between them. "Should I leave you two alone?" Julian shook his head. "No, Sophie. You're intrinsically part of this. I believe you both need to hear what I've learned." Eliza turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral, a mask over the emotions he knew must be churning beneath. "Go ahead, Julian," she said, her voice quiet, almost resigned. "Tell us the truth." He pulled up a weather-beaten wicker chair, the weight of his revelation settling heavily upon him. "I've just spoken with Meredith," he stated, his voice low, steady. "And she has confirmed a suspicion I've harbored, a truth I refuse to see. She was responsible, Eliza, for what happened to you." A slight frown creased Eliza's brow, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Meredith? I don't understand. What are you talking about?" Julian's hands clenched, a reflexive defense against the pain of uttering the words. "She was envious of us, Eliza. Of you. She believed you were a distraction. That you were leading me away from the family, from the business empire she valued above all else. So, she orchestrated your removal, your disappearance from my life." The color drained from Eliza's face. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no sound emerged. Her gaze flickered to Sophie, then back to Julian, her breathing shallow. That can't be. Doesn't make any sense. Why would she?" "I didn't understand it either, not truly," Julian admitted, his voice thick with a sorrow that spanned 2 decades. "I never comprehended the depth of her animosity towards you. But Meredith has always been manipulative. She finds ways to get what she wants, regardless of the cost to others." Sophie, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "So, you're saying your sister, she kidnapped my mom? How could something like that even happen?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, the gesture one of profound weariness. "I don't have all the precise details yet. But Meredith confessed to arranging the situation. Eliza, you didn't just leave me. You were taken. And whatever trauma followed, whatever she endured, it's what stole her memory." Eliza shook her head, a slow, disbelieving motion, her hands trembling in her lap. "This can't be true. It's monstrous. I don't remember any of it." "I know you don't, Eliza," Julian said, his voice laced with a profound gentleness. "I know. But it is the truth. You were forcibly taken from me. And I never, ever stopped looking for you." A suffocating silence descended. Eliza stared at her hands, her face a canvas of shock and dawning horror. Sophie sat beside her, her eyes wide, struggling to absorb the brutal reality. "But how?" Eliza finally whispered, her voice cracking, fragile. "How could this have happened? And I don't remember any of it. Any of you. I don't know the exact mechanics of it," Julian replied, leaning forward, his gaze intense. "But I believe it's connected to an accident. You mentioned remembering painting in a field, feeling scared, and then nothing. A blank, right?" Eliza nodded slowly, her brow furrowed in a painful effort of recall. "Yes. The field, the fear, and then Just emptiness. A lump formed in Julian's throat. That's precisely when you vanished. I suspect something catastrophic occurred shortly after. Perhaps you were trying to escape, running from whatever Meredith had set in motion, and there was an accident. Severe one. That's when your memory was lost. And then somehow you found your way here to this remote corner of Vermont, and began to build a new life, a life devoid of your past. Eliza's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes, a reflection of Julian's own pain, brimming with tears. She turned to Sophie, her voice a broken whisper. I don't know what to say. Sophie leaned in, her arm instinctively going around her mother. Her own young face pale with shock but resolute. Mom, you don't have to say anything right now. This is an earthquake. We'll get through it. Together. Julian watched as Eliza's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. The shock, the confusion, the dawning comprehension of such a profound betrayal gave way to raw, unfiltered grief. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, convulsive sobs. Sophie held her tightly, a pillar of strength in the sudden violent storm. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Julian felt the burn of tears in his own eyes. He had chased answers for 20 years, hoping for closure. The truth, now revealed, offered no solace, only a fresh, agonizing wave of what had been stolen. I am so profoundly sorry, Eliza, Julian whispered, his voice barely audible above her quiet sobs. I should have protected you. I should have found you sooner. I should have done more. Eliza offered no response, her grief too immense for words, as she leaned heavily into Sophie's comforting embrace. Julian sank back in his chair, the sheer weight of the truth of Meredith's treachery pressing down on him like a physical burden. He had unearthed the secrets that had torn their lives asunder, but in their place, he wasn't sure if the shattered pieces could ever be truly reassembled. The sun bled into the western Vermont hills, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading gold. Hours had passed since Julian's devastating revelation, yet its oppressive weight still hung heavy in the farmhouse air. He had retreated, giving Eliza and Sophie the space they so desperately needed to absorb the enormity of Meredith's betrayal. Inside, a profound quiet had fallen. Eliza, after the initial storm of grief, had withdrawn into a silent, internal landscape, undoubtedly trying to reconcile the woman she believed herself to be with the ghost of a past she couldn't recall. Sophie, a steadfast presence, remained by her side. As the evening air grew cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, Julian re-entered the house. Sophie sat alone at the worn kitchen table, her hands cradling a mug of what looked like long cold tea. She looked up as he entered, a small, sad smile touching her lips. How is she? Julian asked, his voice a low murmur, his gaze drifting towards the hallway where Eliza had retreated. Sophie sighed, setting the mug down. She's processing. I don't really know. I think it's just an immense amount to take in all at once. Julian nodded, a familiar tightness in his throat. I know. I never intended to unleash it all on her like that, but she deserved to know. She had a right to the truth of what happened. You did the right thing, Mr. Vance, Sophie said softly, her gaze unwavering. She needed to hear it. In a strange way, I think we both did. A contemplative silence settled between them, filled with unspoken emotions. Sophie, raised in this secluded world, now found herself entangled in the complex, painful web of a past that wasn't her own. Do you think, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, breaking the quiet, do you think she'll ever truly remember? Julian let out a slow, heavy breath, leaning against the ancient countertop. I don't know, Sophie. I honestly don't know. Hope so for her sake. But even if she doesn't, it's enough that she's here. That she's alive. Just you being here for her now, that's what matters, Julian said, his voice gentle. You, Sophie, you're the one who's been her anchor all these years. You gave her a reason to keep going, even when she didn't know what she was moving on from. Before Sophie could reply, The soft sound of footsteps emanated from the hallway. Julian turned. Eliza stood in the doorway. She was pale, undeniably so, with shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, yet a certain fragile composure had returned. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet, her gaze meeting Julian's directly. "Of course," he replied, his heart quickening as he moved towards her. Eliza gestured towards the living room. They walked in silence, the unspoken tension a palpable entity between them, until they stood once more before the painting. The catalyst, the silent witness. "I don't remember everything," Eliza began, her voice a mere breath of sound, yet carrying immense weight. "But I do remember some things. Flashes. The field. The sunlight on the canvas. You." Julian's breath caught. You remember me." Not everything," she clarified, a slow shake of her head. "It's like shards of glass. Glimpses. Pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit. But when I saw that photograph you showed me, and when you told me what happened, it stirred something deep inside. Resonance. I don't know if I'll ever recover it all, Julian. But I feel that there's truth in what you're saying. You know, I loved you." He swallowed, the rush of emotion almost unbearable. He had dreamt of hearing those words for an eternity. Now they were a bittersweet melody, a reminder of all that had been lost, yet a promise of what might still be. "I never stopped looking for you, Eliza," he said, his voice thick, unsteady. "For 20 years I thought you were gone forever. I thought I had lost you. But now that you're here, Eliza, I just want to make things right. It doesn't matter if you never remember every detail. We can start anew. We can build something here now." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, and she shook her head, a sad, tender smile playing on her lips. "It's not that simple, Julian. So much time has passed. So much has changed. I'm not the same woman I was back then." "I don't care," Julian insisted, stepping closer, his gaze earnest. "We've both been irrevocably altered by these lost years. But that doesn't mean we can't find our way back to something. We have a second chance, Eliza. A rare, precious thing." Eliza looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice a low whisper. "Scared of the blanks, the things I can't recall. Scared of what Meredith did, the extent of it. Feel like I don't even know who I am anymore." Julian reached out, his touch infinitely gentle as he took her trembling hands in his. "You are still, at your core, the woman I fell in love with. And whatever comes next, whatever we uncover, we will face it together. You are not alone in this, Eliza. Not anymore." She closed her eyes, tears escaping to trace paths down her cheeks. For a long, suspended moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared past and the terrifying uncertainty of their future hanging heavy between them. Finally, a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her voice, when it came, was shaky but resolute. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. We'll try." A profound wave of relief washed over Julian. It wasn't a perfect resolution, no neat tying of loose ends. But it was a beginning. Fragile, hopeful start. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her eyes luminous with a tentative hope as she observed her mother and Julian, two survivors clinging to each other after a devastating storm. Eliza gently pulled her hands free, dabbing at her tears. There's one thing I need to do," she said, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. "Before we can truly move forward." Julian frowned, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "What's that, Eliza?" Her expression hardened, a spark of the vibrant, determined woman he remembered igniting in her eyes. "I need to confront Meredith. I need answers. From her." A cold dread settled in Julian's stomach at Eliza's declaration. Facing Meredith again after everything was a daunting prospect. He knew his sister's capacity for manipulation, for cruelty. But Eliza's need for this confrontation, for this closure, was palpable. "Are you absolutely sure that's what you want, Eliza?" Julian asked, his voice low, steeling himself for the inevitable conflict. Eliza nodded, her resolve unwavering, wiping the last vestiges of tears from her eyes. Though weary, they now held a fire that had been absent. I have to, Julian. I can't live with these shadows, these unanswered questions. If I don't face her, hear it from her own lips, I'll never truly be able to move on. I need to understand why. The quiet determination in her voice was a testament to her resilience. Julian's heart ached for the ordeal she was choosing to endure. For years, he had suppressed the thought of Meredith's involvement, the idea too monstrous to contemplate. Now the truth was undeniable. Part of him wanted to shield Eliza, but this was her battle, her reclamation. If that's what you feel you must do, he said, his voice quiet but supportive, then I will stand with you. I'll help you. Sophie, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward, her young face a mask of concern and protectiveness. Mom, I don't want to see you hurt any more than you already have been. Are you absolutely, positively sure this is something you're ready for? Eliza offered her daughter a faint, reassuring smile. I'm not sure of much these days, sweetheart, she admitted, her voice soft. But I am certain of this. I cannot live my life haunted by these unanswered whys. If I don't do this, I'll always be looking over my shoulder. Sophie nodded, her worry still evident but overridden by respect for her mother's decision. Okay. Then I'm with you, whatever you decide. Julian drew a deep breath, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. He had spent a lifetime constructing defenses around his emotions, his heart, and particularly around his fractured relationship with Meredith. Now those walls were irrevocably breached. I'll call her, he said, his voice steady despite the internal tempest. We'll arrange for her to come here. But you need to understand, Eliza, Meredith will not make this easy. She will twist words, deny, deflect. You must be prepared for that. Eliza's gaze hardened further. I'll be ready. Julian retrieved his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact that had long been synonymous with conflict and unease. Meredith answered on the second ring, her voice sharp, impatient. Julian, what is it now? His grip on the phone tightened, his own voice tense but controlled. You need to come to Vermont, Meredith. Immediately. A brief, loaded pause, followed by a dry, mocking laugh. Vermont. Whatever for. What new game are you playing at, Julian? This is no game, he replied, his tone glacial. Eliza wants to speak with you. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with shock and a thinly veiled panic. Meredith's voice, when it finally emerged, was strained, almost unrecognizable. Eliza. You mean she remembers? She remembers enough. Julian cut her off, his patience exhausted. And she demands answers. So you will come. Tomorrow. Julian, you don't understand the complexities. Oh, I understand perfectly, he snapped, his control fraying. This is happening, Meredith. I strongly suggest you prepare yourself. Before she could formulate another protest, Julian ended the call. His chest heaved with the force of the exchange. He turned to Eliza, his heart aching for the ordeal that lay ahead. She'll be here tomorrow, he said softly. But remember this, Eliza. No matter what unfolds, you are not alone in this. Eliza offered a small, grateful nod, though the tension in her shoulders was palpable. The coming day would be fraught, perhaps more so than she could yet imagine. But this was the path she had chosen. There was no turning back. Sleep was a fleeting visitor to all three that night. In his Burlington hotel room, Julian stared into the darkness, replaying decades of interactions with Meredith, each memory now tainted by the hideous lens of her betrayal. Their shared childhood, their early business ventures, all poisoned. He'd known her ruthlessness, but this was a different magnitude of monstrous. Guilt, a corrosive acid, ate at him. How had he been so blind? How had he allowed her to manipulate his life so completely? Fear, too, was a cold companion. Fear for Eliza, for the confrontation, for his own unraveling control. Miles away, in the quiet Vermont farmhouse, Eliza lay awake, the moonlit fields outside her window a stark contrast to the turmoil within. She had built a life here, a sanctuary, never knowing the shadows of her stolen past lurked so close. Now the past and present were on a collision course. The woman she had become was about to face the architect of her lost identity. Her memories of Meredith were vague, shrouded in the same fog that obscured so much else, but the core truth resonated. Meredith had wanted her gone and had succeeded. Dawn arrived too soon, its pale light filtering through the windows, heralding a day that promised to irrevocably alter their lives. Julian reached Maple Ridge Farm early. His nerves stretched taut. Sophie, already up, was making a pretense of preparing breakfast, though the oppressive anxiety had stolen everyone's appetite. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, her face pale but composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "She'll be here soon," Julian said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room, as he took a seat opposite her. Eliza simply nodded, her silence more eloquent than words. The air in the room was thick with unspoken fears, unasked questions. There was nothing left to say. The storm was upon them. An hour later, the distant sound of a car engine, growing steadily louder as it navigated the long gravel driveway, shattered the fragile peace. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He glanced out the window. A sleek, black sedan, ostentatiously out of place in this rustic setting, rolled to a stop. And there, emerging with her signature air of calculated superiority, was Meredith Sterling. Poised, polished, the very picture of indifference to the emotional wreckage she had wrought. Yet Julian, his senses hyper-alert, detected the almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of her jaw, the subtle rigidity in her movements. She was not as composed as she projected. Julian rose, his own hands betraying a slight tremor as he moved towards the door. "She's here." Eliza took a deep, steadying breath, steeling herself. "Let's do this." Together, they stepped out onto the porch to meet the woman who had fractured their lives. The atmosphere outside the farmhouse crackled with an almost suffocating tension. The moment Meredith Sterling stepped from her chauffeured sedan, the very air seemed to cool, to sharpen. She exuded a chilling confidence, each movement precise, calculated, as if she were entering a boardroom negotiation rather than a personal reckoning. Julian stood by the door, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Beside him, Eliza's face was a mask of calm, but he could feel the slight tremor that ran through her hand as it brushed his. Sophie, a silent guardian, had followed them out, her protective gaze fixed on her mother. Meredith's expensive heels clicked with an incongruous authority on the gravel path. She paused a few feet away, slowly removing her designer sunglasses, her sharp, appraising gaze shifting from Julian to Eliza, then back again. "Well," Meredith said, her voice perfectly modulated, coolly detached. "Here we all are." Julian's jaw tightened. The sight of his sister, so impeccably composed after the devastation she had wrought, ignited a fresh wave of fury. He fought the urge to speak, to unleash his own torrent of accusations. This was Eliza's moment. "You know why I asked you here, Meredith," Eliza said, her voice remarkably steady, low and resonant. There was no trace of hesitation, no hint of the turmoil that must have been raging within. The strength Eliza had forged in the crucible of her lost years was now a palpable force. Meredith tilted her head, a faint, dismissive smile playing on her lips. "Do I? Or are we simply here to dredge up ancient grievances, Eliza?" Julian could restrain himself no longer. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the charged air. "Cut the act, Meredith. You know precisely why you're here. The time for lies and evasions is over. Tell Eliza the truth." Meredith's smile faltered, just for an instant, her eyes narrowing as she turned her full attention to Eliza. "What truth is he referring to, Eliza? Because from my perspective, This is all rather historical. You took me, Eliza stated, her voice unwavering, each word a carefully aimed dart. You had me taken from him, from the life we were building together in New York City. And you honestly believe that because 2 decades have passed, it no longer matters. Meredith's expression hardened, her gaze locking with Eliza's. I didn't take you, Eliza. That's an exceptionally dramatic interpretation. Then tell me what you did, Eliza demanded, taking a step closer, her voice rising, imbued with a righteous anger. Tell me why I have no memory of my life before I found myself here. Tell me why I've lived in a fog of unknowing for 20 years, while you simply carried on as if nothing had happened. Meredith's eyes flicked to Julian, a micro-expression of something unreadable, before returning to Eliza. Her voice, when she spoke, was tight with a carefully controlled disdain. You were a complication, Eliza. Distraction. Julian was on the cusp of true greatness. Everything our family had worked for, everything I had orchestrated, was about to come to fruition. And then you appeared. You would have undone it all. Undone it. Eliza's eyes widened in disbelief. We were in love. We were going to be married. You were pulling him away. Meredith retorted, her voice sharp, cutting. Away from the business, from his responsibilities, from the future that was his destiny. I was not about to stand by and watch decades of work be dismantled because you two were playing at domesticity. A surge of protective fury rose in Julian's chest, but Eliza spoke before he could intervene. So, what did you do, Meredith? She pressed, her voice relentless. Did you have me kidnapped? Did you try to frighten me away? Meredith's lips thinned into a bloodless line. I had no desire to cause you actual harm, Eliza, she said, her voice cold, measured. My objective was simply your absence. I knew that if you were no longer in the picture, Julian would refocus. His ambition would reassert itself. So, I arranged for a separation. A separation. Julian spat, stepping forward, his control shattering. You had her abducted. She lost her memory, Meredith, because of whatever monstrous arrangement you made. Do you have any comprehension of the devastation you caused? For the first time, a flicker of something, guilt, or merely the closest approximation Meredith was capable of, crossed her features. I didn't anticipate that outcome, she snapped, her composure momentarily fracturing. It was never intended to go that far. Julian shook his head, disbelief and a boiling rage warring within him. You destroyed our lives. You stole Eliza from me, and you've lied about it, lived with that lie for 20 years. Meredith's expression hardened once more, her voice regaining its defensive edge. You imagine I derived some perverse pleasure from this? I did it to protect you, Julian. You've always been too sentimental, too easily swayed. Eliza Hayes was not good for you, for our family, for the future. Eliza's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps as she fought to contain the storm of emotions. You had no right, she finally choked out, her voice trembling with a potent blend of anger and profound sorrow. You stole my life. I don't even recognize the woman I was supposed to be. All these years, a lie. My entire existence, a fabrication orchestrated by you. Meredith crossed her arms, her expression glacial, unmoved. It wasn't a lie, Eliza. It was a necessary recalibration. And you've managed quite well, haven't you? Survived. Built a life for yourself, even without Julian. That is not the point. Eliza cried, her voice cracking. The point is that you arrogantly usurped my choices. You played God with our lives, deciding what was best for everyone. And now you expect me to be grateful for my survival. I don't even know who I am, Meredith, because of your actions. The raw, unadulterated pain in Eliza's voice hung in the air, a palpable accusation. Julian watched as Meredith's impassive facade flickered again, just for a heartbeat, with something that might have been regret. But the mask of cold control was swiftly reasserted. I didn't plan for it to unfold precisely this way, Meredith conceded, her voice quieter now, but still laced with an unyielding defiance. But it did. And here we are. The past is immutable, Eliza. Eliza drew a deep, shuddering breath, her face set with a newfound, steely resolve. No, you can't change the past. But you can acknowledge your part in it. I deserve that. Julian deserves that. Meredith stood, implacable, her arms still crossed, her jaw set. For a moment, it seemed she might offer some word, some admission, however partial, of her profound betrayal. Instead, she merely shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin, bitter line. Believe whatever narrative suits you, Eliza, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It changes nothing. Julian's fists clenched, but before he could unleash his own fury, Eliza stepped forward again, positioning herself directly in front of Meredith. Her eyes, though shadowed with pain, burned with a fierce, unquenchable light. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, resonant with a strength that seemed to surprise even herself. I'm not asking you to change anything, Meredith, Eliza said. I'm telling you that your power over me, over my life, is finished. You may have stolen 20 years, but you will not steal one more moment. You do not get to define who I am or what my future holds. Not anymore. Meredith didn't flinch, but a new, unfamiliar emotion flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or even a nascent fear. She had always been the puppet master. Now the strings were cut. I am done with you, Meredith, Eliza declared, her voice firm, unequivocal. Whatever control you believed you wielded, it is gone. I am taking my life back. With those words, Eliza turned on her heel, her posture erect, her head held high, and walked back towards the sanctuary of the farmhouse. Sophie, her expression a mixture of awe and fierce pride, followed closely, a silent, unwavering support. Julian remained, his gaze locked on his sister. For a long, charged moment, they stood in the Vermont stillness, the weight of unspoken history, of irrevocable damage, a suffocating presence between them. You will regret this, Julian, Meredith said finally, her voice a low, venomous hiss. No, Meredith, Julian replied, his own voice quiet, but carrying an absolute finality. His gaze was steady, unwavering. You are the one who will live with regret. Without another word, he turned his back on her and walked towards the farmhouse, leaving Meredith Sterling utterly alone, the carefully constructed edifice of her life beginning to crumble around her. Meredith stood, frozen, as Julian's retreating form disappeared into the farmhouse. A profound, alien sensation washed over her. Powerlessness. For decades, she had meticulously controlled every variable, every outcome. Her brother's career, his relationships, even she had believed Eliza's fate. Now it was all unraveling, slipping through her fingers like sand. She had anticipated a confrontation, yes, but not this. Not Eliza, resurrected from the ashes of a forgotten past, imbued with such unyielding resolve. Not Julian, walking away with such quiet, devastating finality, as if she, Meredith Sterling, no longer held any sway. Her world, built on a foundation of manipulation and control, was collapsing. And she had no one to blame but herself. Inside Maple Ridge Farm, Eliza sat at the worn kitchen table, her hands, surprisingly steady now, wrapped around a steaming mug of herbal tea Sophie had pressed into them. The confrontation had been an ordeal. Her heart still thrummed with the lingering adrenaline, but a profound sense of calm, of liberation, was beginning to settle over her. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt a sense of agency, of control over her own narrative. She had faced her tormentor. The scars of the past remained, deep and indelible, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer bound by them. I'm so incredibly proud of you, Mom, Sophie said, her voice soft with emotion, her eyes shining. I don't know if I could have ever found the strength to do what you just did. Eliza managed a faint smile, taking a slow, fortifying sip of tea. Oh, you would have, Sophie. You possess a strength you haven't even begun to tap into. Julian entered the kitchen, closing the door softly behind him. He looked weary, the lines of strain etched deeply around his eyes, but there was also an undeniable lightening, a sense of a heavy burden finally set down. He walked to the table, pulling up a chair beside Eliza, his gaze searching hers. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle. Eliza let out a long, slow breath. "Relieved," she said, the single word encompassing a universe of emotions. "And utterly exhausted. I didn't truly know how that would end." "Neither did I," Julian admitted, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But you were magnificent, Eliza. Your strength, your composure. I don't know how you maintained it." Eliza shook her head, her own smile fading slightly. "I wasn't calm, Julian. Not inside. I was incandescent with fury. But I couldn't let her see it. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing just how deeply she had wounded me." Julian reached across the table, his hand covering hers, his touch warm, grounding. "She no longer has that power over you, Eliza. You reclaimed it today." Eliza nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I still can't fully process it. All those years, I thought I had simply lost myself, that my memories had inexplicably faded. But she actively stole everything from me. And I never even knew." Julian squeezed her hand, his voice soft but resonant with shared pain. "We both lost so much, Eliza. An irreplaceable expanse of time. But now we have a chance. A chance to start over, to rebuild if we choose to." Sophie watched the quiet exchange, her heart swelling with a complex mixture of hope for their future and a profound sadness for the years that had been stolen. Is she going to try to cause more trouble? "Come after you again?" she asked, a flicker of her earlier concern returning. Julian shook his head, a new certainty in his voice. "No. Meredith is finished. She knows she's lost this battle irrevocably. And frankly, she has far too much to lose now by pushing any further. Her empire is built on an image of control. This exposure shatters that." Eliza leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment, as if physically feeling the immense weight of the past finally begin to lift. "It's strange," she said softly, her voice contemplative. "I spent so many years in a fog, not knowing who I truly was, not remembering the life I had before Vermont. Now that some of it has returned, I'm not entirely sure what to do with it." Julian looked at her, his expression filled with a tender understanding. "We'll figure it out, Eliza," he said gently. "Together." Eliza opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. So much lay between them, a chasm of lost years, of unspoken grief, of experiences they could never share. But there was also a fragile, luminous thread of connection, a possibility of something new. And that, more than anything, offered a sliver of hope. I'm ready to try," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know what the future looks like, Julian, but I'm ready to face it." A genuine smile, the first he had allowed himself in what felt like an eternity, transformed Julian's face. "That's all that matters, Eliza." Sophie leaned forward, her voice soft but steady, a comforting presence. "Whatever happens next, whatever path you choose, we'll get through it. Together. We're a family, aren't we? In our own way." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief, of profound gratitude. She reached out, taking Sophie's hand in one of hers, and Julian's in the other. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we are." For the first time in 2 decades, Eliza felt the warmth of belonging, the profound comfort of knowing that despite everything, she was not alone. She had lost so much, but in the wreckage, she had also gained something precious, something new. And that, she realized, was enough. Outside, the Vermont sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues. Meredith Sterling sat in the sterile luxury of her sedan, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. She could feel the invisible walls closing in, the crushing weight of her own actions a suffocating cloak. She had always been the one in control, the master manipulator, the one who dictated terms. Now, everything had irrevocably slipped through her grasp. Julian had chosen Eliza. Eliza had reclaimed her life, her voice. And for the first time in her meticulously curated existence, Meredith had no idea what to do next. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her, a jarring summons. Her lawyer, no doubt. Damage control. There was always damage control. With a sigh that felt dredged from the very depths of her soul, she answered. "Yes, I understand," she said, her voice cold, brittle. "We'll handle it." But as she spoke, something inside her, something vital, seemed to shift, to break. She had spent her life bending others to her will, and now that it had all come crashing down, she felt nothing. No triumph, no lingering anger, not even the solace of regret. Just a vast, hollow emptiness where her power, her identity, had once resided. For the first time, Meredith Sterling understood the true meaning of loss. Back inside the comforting embrace of Maple Ridge Farm, Eliza stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, its final rays setting the green mountains ablaze. The warmth of the evening breeze, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine, brushed against her skin. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, freely. Julian came to stand beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" Eliza smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes, turning to face him. "I'm thinking about tomorrow," she said. "And for the first time in a very, very long time, Julian, I'm not afraid of it." Julian leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead in a gesture of profound tenderness. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "is a new beginning, Eliza." She nodded, a sense of quiet peace, hard-won and precious, settling over her. She didn't know what the future held, what challenges or joys lay ahead. But she knew one thing with an unshakable certainty. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She had taken back her life. And that was enough. Together, they watched the last sliver of the sun disappear, ready, finally, to face whatever came next. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet grace, a series of tentative steps taken towards an undefined future. Maple Ridge Farm, once a repository of buried memories and unanswered questions, transformed into a sanctuary for healing. Julian, Eliza, and Sophie moved through their days together, the past, though acknowledged, no longer the dominant force. Instead, they focused on the present, on the fragile possibilities that lay ahead. The shadow of Meredith's betrayal, though still present, seemed to recede a little more with each passing Vermont sunrise. A sense of peace, fragile yet persistent, began to take root. Julian extended his stay in Vermont indefinitely. What had begun as a pragmatic business trip had morphed into something profoundly personal. The thought of leaving Eliza again, of severing this newly re-established connection after decades of searching, was unbearable. No grand promises were made, no futures meticulously mapped out. Yet an unspoken understanding flowed between them. They were rebuilding, piece by painstaking piece, together. One crisp morning, a few weeks after Meredith's precipitous departure, Julian found Eliza in the garden. She was kneeling in the rich, dark earth, her hands, now familiar with the soil, gently coaxing weeds from around the sturdy vegetable plants she and Sophie had nurtured. The early morning light, filtered through the turning leaves of the maple trees, caught the silver in her hair, making it shine. For a long moment, Julian simply watched her, a quiet ache of tenderness in his chest. There was a serenity about her now, a groundedness that had been absent for so long. Eliza, as if sensing his presence, looked up, her smile soft and welcoming. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, walking over to join her. He crouched beside her, his gaze following her movements as she worked. "You're always out here at this hour." "Why?" Eliza shrugged, her smile deepening. "It's peaceful. Helps me think. To sort things out." Julian nodded, understanding completely. There had been an immense amount to sort through, to process. But as he sat there beside her, amidst the quiet hum of the awakening farm, he realized they had navigated the worst of the storm. They had confronted the devastating truth, faced down the ghosts of the past, and emerged, scarred but whole, on the other side. Now it was simply a matter of what came next. "Eliza," he began, his voice quiet, a note of uncharacteristic hesitation in it. "I've been doing some thinking." She glanced over, her eyes clear and perceptive, holding his. "About what, Julian?" "About us," he replied, his heart, a surprisingly skittish thing, thumping in his chest. "About what happens from here." Eliza's hands stilled in the dirt. For a moment, the only sound was the distant call of a blue jay. The air between them was charged, but it was a different kind of tension than before. Softer, imbued with possibility rather than fraught with fear. "I don't want to rush you, Eliza," Julian continued, choosing his words with care. "I know we've both been through an unimaginable ordeal. I don't expect things to magically revert to how they were 20 years ago. But I also can't bear the thought of losing you again. Not now. Not after everything." Eliza sat back on her heels, wiping her earth-stained hands on her jeans, her gaze steady on his. There was a profound tenderness in her expression, a depth of understanding that made Julian's heart ache with a confusing mix of hope and trepidation. "I don't want to lose you either, Julian," she admitted, her voice soft but clear. "But I'm still not entirely sure what the future looks like for me. I'm still trying to figure out who Eliza Morgan is, now that Eliza Hayes has resurfaced." "I know," Julian said gently, his own understanding absolute. "And I'm not asking for immediate answers, for grand declarations. I'm simply asking if we can try. If we can navigate this new landscape, figure it out together." Eliza's eyes softened, and a slow, thoughtful nod followed. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'd like that, Julian. I'd like to try." A wave of profound relief, so potent it almost buckled him, washed over Julian. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, reaching out to take her hand. Her fingers, cool from the morning earth, curled around his. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here." Eliza squeezed his hand, her own smile growing a little brighter, a little more confident. "One day at a time sounds perfect." They remained in the garden for a while longer, the silence between them comfortable now, companionable. The ghosts had not been entirely banished, but they no longer held dominion. There were no more secrets, no more devastating lies, just the two of them, and the nascent promise of what lay ahead. Later that afternoon, Sophie joined them in the farmhouse kitchen as they prepared a simple lunch. The three of them moved around the small, familiar space with an easy, unforced rhythm, a natural choreography that felt as if it had been practiced for years. It was unremarkable, yet in its very simplicity, there was a profound comfort. For the first time, surrounded by the mundane yet sacred rituals of shared life, Julian felt something deep within him shift, settle. He had spent 2 decades chasing an elusive phantom of success, attempting to fill the cavernous void Eliza's absence had carved in his soul. But now, sitting here in this rustic Vermont kitchen with Sophie, he realized that what he had truly been searching for all along wasn't an empire, but this, family, a sense of belonging, love. It wouldn't be a fairy tale. The path ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges. Scars, both visible and unseen, would take time to heal. But they had survived. They had, against all odds, found their way back to each other. And that, more than anything, was a beacon of hope. As evening approached, painting the Vermont sky in soft, impressionistic hues of lavender and rose, Julian and Eliza took a walk through the meadows that surrounded Maple Ridge Farm. The air was warm, fragrant with the scent of late-season wildflowers and the rich aroma of the earth. They walked in a comfortable silence for a time, their footsteps falling into an easy, synchronized rhythm, the world around them quiet, peaceful. At a certain point, where the meadow sloped gently towards the woods, Eliza stopped, turning to face him. Her eyes, in the soft twilight, were luminous, filled with a quiet, resolute strength. "Julian," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying a profound conviction. "I don't know what the future holds. I can't pretend to. But I know, with every fiber of my being, that I want to face it with you." Julian's heart swelled, a rush of emotion so potent it momentarily stole his breath. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of silver-kissed auburn hair from her face. "And we will, Eliza," he promised, his own voice thick with emotion. "We'll figure it out. Together." They stood there for a long, timeless moment, wrapped in the quiet sanctity of the Vermont evening, the unspoken sorrows of their past giving way to the tentative hope of their shared future. Then Eliza leaned in, resting her head against his chest. Julian's arms enveloped her, holding her close, the warmth of her presence, the simple, profound reality of her being there, filling the empty, aching spaces within him that had been vacant for so long. The past had exacted a terrible price. But now they had a future. And whatever that future held, whatever trials or joys it might bring, they would face it. Not alone, but together,